This is the 415ers brought to you by the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. Coming at you twice a week here in the off season. That's Marc Grandi. I'm Evan Giddings. You can listen to us on the Odyssey app as well as wherever you download your podcast from. Please download, rate, and subscribe. 5 stars are appreciated. The last piece of this episode, Marc, I thought we had a little bit of fun. I saw NFL Media's Cynthia Freeland. I apologize if I butchered that name a little bit, but was basically putting together a list of underappreciated players, and the 49ers, she had named Brock Purdy, most underappreciated player on the 49ers. Now, I do want to preface this by saying she defended it by essentially, calculating win share versus salary, and so, of course, the 100th highest paid quarterback in the league that led his team to an undefeated record down the stretch of a season is going to, analytically be very valuable or underappreciated, I should say. But he doesn't necessarily fall under my definition of underappreciated, and I'm curious where you would go with this.
Yeah, for me, when I think of underappreciated, I kind of think of I don't know, like if you were to poll 49er fans and they were to list their 5 most favorite 49er players, like guys that maybe tend to not make that list, but are still very impactful to winning. That's kind of how I like who isn't at the top of mind for 49er fans, but who is still so incredibly important to the success of the 49ers. I have one who you might disagree with in terms of the definition of underappreciated. I think he's kind of on the border. He's up there, but he's not near the top, and he's not one of this team's superstars. For me, again, I'm not sure if this will totally fit the underappreciated category, but for me, it's Brandon Ayuk. I think the discussion around him is changing a little bit. I think there are way more people now than a year ago who would say he's this team's best wide receiver. A year ago, I think everyone would have said Deebo Samuel. Now it's probably split a little bit more, and you can understand why. Ayuk had a career season. Deebo Samuel did not. And I think that trend does continue. But right now, considering what he means to the offense, Evan, and considering who else they have on the offense, all those stars, I think Brandon Ayuk can get lost a little bit. The appreciation for him can kind of could lack a little bit. I don't think he's appreciated as much as he is important to this team. So my first one, which is maybe a little bit of a cop-out because he's kind of, I think, on that edge, the first one for me is Brandon Ayuk.
No, that was a place my mind went to because originally I was just using the definition of this, list created. And if you're going off of money, like Ayuk is absolutely underpaid and underappreciated compared to the production he gives. I would also, I know he's not underappreciated by fans, but maybe compared to how much he's paid is Christian McCaffrey. Last year, the 49ers paid him, Marc, about $1.1 million after acquiring him from Carolina. I know that goes up to about 12 this year, but even then, for the amount that he has used, for the production he gives, and for the clear efficiency that he ratcheted upon joining San Francisco, like that's my guy. Brock Purdy was making $890K last year. Christian McCaffrey made $1.1 million, and they both had about a similar impact on the 49ers' success. So those would be, I guess, my 2 guys, both Ayuk and then, of course, McCaffrey, if we're talking about money made.
I like that. That's a good one. One for me, I think it's the center on the offensive line, Jake Brendel. He was kind of a relative unknown heading into last year. Remember, it was Alex Mack the year before, the year the 49ers lost to the Rams in the NFC Championship game with that wild season. He came over from Atlanta. He knew Kyle Shanahan ahead of time. A long career, a really good player, was on the NFL All-Decade team, I think, for the 2000s, through 2010 or whatever the case was, maybe 2010 through 2020. He had a fantastic career, lots of All-Pros and Pro Bowlers and all that. They brought him in for 1 year, and there was the discussion at this point last offseason, is he going to come back for another year? He ultimately decides to retire, and the 49ers, I don't think scramble is the right word, but they have to try to find his replacement, and they found Jake Brendel. And not saying I think he was one of the better centers in football, but he definitely held up his end of the bargain on the offensive line last year. And as is the case, I think with a lot of offensive linemen, specifically when you have Trent Williams. I mean, Trent Williams is a great example. He gets a ton of love because he's legitimately the best offensive lineman in football, maybe the best player in football. But anything short of that, you don't really get a ton of love as an offensive lineman. And the only time you're noticed, for the most part, at least by most fans, and I think I include myself in this because I am not able to understand all of the intricacies of run blocking and how difficult it is in all of that. If you're not Trent Williams, you generally are only talked about when you give up a sack or you get run over by a defensive lineman. So I think a lot of offensive linemen are underappreciated. Trent Williams is not one of those. But of the other four that the 49ers have that are their starters, I think Jake Brendel is probably the least, maybe not the least appreciated, but the most underappreciated of that group.
Yeah, I think off of that, on the offensive side, I would probably lean Kyle Juszczyk. I know that he's paid the most for a fullback, but anybody whose job it is to hit other people with their heads and not receive any glory or touchdowns or yards, and just your job is to open up everything for everyone else, to me is always going to be underappreciated. But my final player on the 49ers that I would personally select as the most underappreciated, and I tried to take into account money made, draft positioning, the potential of getting lost, as well as, of course, production. It's Talanoa Hufanga.
Okay.
And I just feel like this guy took the biggest stride of arguably anybody last year and is always naturally going to be kind of third fiddle. The secondary furthest away from the football, so you're behind Nick Bosa, you're behind Fred Warner. Even on the outside, Charvarius Ward, who was a big free agency pickup last year, was incredible last year for the Niners, might get some more shine. But as an all-pro in his second season, I just think Hufanga is really poised to position himself for another big season and to have a huge impact on this year. But even if you're looking at, of course, money made, he's on his rookie deal. He gets lost behind the late round picks, the other fifth rounders, a guy like George Kittle. I also just think that because of the position he plays, when he's around the ball, people love him, but they're generally looking at the Warners and the Bosas, and he's not the most vocal as well, of course, in his young career. So for me, when you take into account what the guy makes, how much, of course, he does on the field, but also who he is behind on the depth chart of leadership and, of course, just in general, Hufanga to me would be the most underappreciated 49er right now.
Yeah, I feel that one as well. And I think something you mentioned there at the end in terms of leadership, with Jimmy Ward having moved on to the Houston Texans, it leaves a gigantic leadership void on the defense, specifically in the secondary. I don't think we can make the same argument for Talanoa Hufanga a year from now, because I think the expectation is that he's going to have another fantastic season as he just had this most recent year. Maybe he doesn't happen to intercept the ball as many times, and maybe there aren't as many flashy plays because a lot of times it's just the way the ball bounces. But he's going to put up another good season, it seems. But he's going to have to do more in terms of a leadership role and be more visible in that sense. And I think with that comes a little bit more appreciation, whether it's from fans or teammates or coaches or whatever the situation is. So I don't think we'll be able to have this conversation about Hufanga a year from now. But at the moment, I think you're right. That is a fair point. One more before we do wrap this up. This one kind of comes out of left field just a little bit. I think that football teams' punt and kick returners can kind of get lost a little bit. Especially when you have had one that's good. The 49ers haven't had good punt and kick returners for a really long time. Ray McLeod came in last year from Pittsburgh and did a really good job. He did not lose a ball on a fumble once all season long, and he also had a number of receptions and got into the end zone on a catch once as well. So as a reserve receiver And as the team's really only kick returner and punt returner, I thought he did a fantastic job. And if you, again, it's kind of similar to an offensive lineman. You don't get a ton of praise as the return man, but you will get all the blame if you just fumble once and the ball goes to the opposition. So I think that's kind of a thankless job at times as well. Ray McLeod did a good job in his first year, and I think he deserves a little bit of love as well.
Right on. Well, we'll table this conversation. I'm sure there'll be a lot more underappreciated players as we move throughout the offseason, of course, in the season. But we do appreciate all ththose of you listening to the 415ers podcast on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network. Please go download that Odyssey app, rate us, subscribe to us there. That's Marc Grandi. I'm Evan Giddings. First of 2 episodes this week. We'll talk to you next time.